The sun had barely crested the horizon when the town of Red River stirred awake, the dusty streets glowing with the first timid rays of morning. Horse hooves clattered on wooden planks outside the general store. The faint aroma of fresh bread and strong coffee drifted from the corners of the small settlement. But beneath the calm of this ordinary frontier town, a storm of secrets and longing was quietly gathering. At the edge of the valley, atop the rolling hills where the wind cut sharp and cold, a woman watched the town through the pale mist. She wore a plain gray dress frayed at the edges and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her delicate features. To the casual observer, she was just another traveler, a woman of modest means seeking shelter or work, but she carried a wealth no eye could see, a fortune hidden behind the careful mask of poverty. Her name was Leora Vale, and she was a widow with eyes like winter skies, cold and stormy, yet capable of rare warmth. Once she had moved in the gilded halls of high society, her laughter ringing through chandeliered rooms, her presence commanding every gaze. But riches, she had learned, could not buy the one thing she craved, a heart that loved her for herself and not the gold she wore like armor. Determined to find that love, Leora shed her fine silks, replaced them with coarse linen, and vanished into the world of the common folk. Where no one would suspect her true identity, life in Red River was unforgiving. A place where reputations were as fragile as a teacup and a man's pride weighed heavier than his conscience. The townsfolk whispered of her arrival, a stranger who appeared suddenly as the autumn winds began to chill the valley. Some said she was a seamstress seeking work. Others believed her to be a wandering teacher or healer. Leora let them speculate. Every day she moved with quiet grace through the streets, eyes alert, listening to stories and observing men as they went about their routines. None stirred her heart, for she sought not just attention, but a man with courage, integrity, and a depth of feeling no riches could summon. And then there was Kalen Redhawk, a man who carried the weight of his past like a scar across his soul. He had once walked among the Apache tribes, fierce and proud, but circumstances had cast him aside, leaving him a man rejected by his own people. Kalen had long ago learned the harsh truth that love was often measured by acceptance and circumstance, not by the heart's devotion. He wandered the edges of Red River, keeping to himself, observing from the shadows, and speaking only when necessary. Yet there was a quiet magnetism to him, a strength that went unnoticed by most but resonated with those few who cared to look deeper. Elora first saw him on the banks of the river, where the water ran swift and clear. He was attempting to mend a broken fishing net, his hands skilled and steady. But his expression held a melancholy that mirrored her own hidden sorrow. For a moment she hesitated, struck by the realization that perhaps this man, marked by rejection and solitude, might be the one capable of seeing her truth. But she could not reveal herself yet, not while the careful charade she had built remained intact. Instead, she watched, lingering at the edge of the forest, a shadow among shadows. Learning his routines, his habits, the unspoken patterns of his life, Red River itself was a town caught between eras. Wooden storefronts leaned at odd angles, dust from the high plains settled in every crevice, and lanterns swung gently in the breeze as the sun sank each evening. People were hard and practical, measuring character by deeds and reputation rather than appearance or wealth. Leora knew she must play her part convincingly, not just to fool the town, but to protect her heart. Each encounter was a delicate dance. She helped an elderly widow carry firewood one morning, shared a loaf of bread with a struggling family the next, and slowly began weaving herself into the fabric of the town's life. Yet through it all, Kalen remained distant, observing from afar, a quiet shadow that neither praised nor condemned her. The townsfolk, ever watchful, began to take notice of the new woman in their midst. Whispers followed her like a persistent wind, curious and speculative. Where does she come from? They asked. Why is she always alone? They were right to wonder. Leora moved with purpose, but every step was calculated. Her heart, despite its longing, was cautious, and the lessons of past betrayals had left a deep impression. Trust, she knew, was not freely given, and in a town like Red River, appearances often carried more weight than truths. Kalen, meanwhile, found himself drawn to her. though he fought the feeling as stubbornly as one resists a wound. There was something in the way she carried herself, a mixture of humility and quiet strength, that stirred emotions he had long buried beneath layers of pride and skepticism. It was dangerous, he knew, to care for someone whose past and fortune was unknown. Yet the pull was undeniable, a tether neither could ignore. He began to linger closer, offering a word here, a helpful hand there, small gestures that betrayed the restraint he so carefully cultivated, even as the air turned crisp with approaching winter. The tension between them grew. Leora, walking the fine line between concealment and connection, felt an unfamiliar thrill at his attention. It was not the flattery she had once known in the drawing rooms of the rich, but something raw and real, a connection that bypassed gold, status, and expectation. And Kalen, in turn, felt a hope he had thought impossible, a spark that reminded him of a life he might still claim if he dared to embrace it. But Red River, like any town perched on the edge of civilization, held dangers as well as opportunities. Jealous rivals, inquisitive neighbors, and the ever-watchful eyes of strangers threatened to expose her secret. Leora knew one misstep could undo everything, revealing her wealth and shattering the fragile trust she was building with Kalen. And yet each day she stayed, each moment spent near him, the gamble felt increasingly worth the risk. Her heart, long disciplined and wary, began to betray her carefully constructed defenses. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged hills and the sky flared with crimson and gold, Leora found herself alone on the porch of the small inn where she lodged. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying scents of smoke and distant rain. Kalen appeared at the edge of the clearing, his silhouette framed by the dying light. For the first time, their eyes met without pretense, and in that gaze, unspoken truths and possibilities lingered. Neither spoke immediately, for words would have spoiled the moment. Yet both understood that the threads of their fates were entwining in ways that neither fully controlled nor yet comprehended. And then, just as the quiet seemed absolute, a distant shout broke the stillness. The echo of conflict, or perhaps misfortune. Both turned instinctively toward the sound, their curiosity and concern mingling with a sudden, unspoken fear. In that instant, the delicate balance of secrecy and longing teetered on the edge. And Leora knew that the choices she had made would soon face tests she could not predict. Kalen, for his part, felt a cold knot of foreboding tighten in his chest. Something was coming, an event that would draw them together, challenge their trust, and force each to confront truths long avoided. As darkness fell over Red River, the wind carrying the first hints of snow, the two stood apart, yet bound by an invisible thread, hearts uncertain but intertwined. Leora's secret, Kellen's solitude, the town's watchful eyes, they all waited in the quiet night, as inevitable as the rising moon. And somewhere in the shadows, a choice was looming, a choice that would alter the course of both their lives, and perhaps the very story of love and redemption in the untamed frontier in Red River. Nothing remained hidden for long, and yet, for this brief moment, the rich widow in disguise and the rejected Apache stood on the brink of a discovery neither could have anticipated. What would follow was uncertain, fraught with danger, longing, and the chance for a love that defied expectation. And as the first snowflakes began to drift from the sky, the town slept, unaware that a tale of wealth, deception, and true devotion was quietly beginning to unfold. The town of Red River awoke the next morning to a brittle silence, the kind that hinted at something shifting beneath the surface. Leora Vale stepped out of the inn, pulling her shawl tighter against the chill that had crept through the valley overnight. Frost sparkled on the edges of the wooden boards, and the distant mountains were veiled in a pale mist. The town seemed unchanged, yet she sensed the tremor in the air, subtle and unsettling. As though unseen eyes were watching her every move, she had learned, through experience and caution, that secrets were rarely kept long in a town like this, and that trust was a currency earned slowly, measured by action and loyalty rather than words. Kalen Redhawk was already moving along the riverbank, his silhouette stark against the frost-covered earth. He had spent the early hours checking traps and repairing equipment, his routine unwavering even in the presence of unease. His dark eyes scanned the woods with careful vigilance, not for danger alone, but for the subtle signs of life that often went unnoticed. When he saw Leora approaching, he stiffened, his hands resting on the worn handle of his knife, a reflex born of years of survival and solitude. He did not call to her, yet the faintest lift of his brow acknowledged her presence. Leora paused a few feet away, careful to keep her distance, yet feeling a pull she could not resist. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that contrasted with the cold around them. Kalen did not answer immediately, instead letting the silence linger, a test, a measure of patience. When he finally spoke, his tone was low, deliberate. "The frost is heavier than usual this morning. Could be the start of a long winter." There was no judgment in his words, only observation, yet Leora sensed in them an unspoken caution, a subtle warning that drew her closer, even as it kept her wary. As they moved through the town later that day, the patterns of Red River unfolded before them. The blacksmith's hammer rang sharply against iron, echoing through the streets, and the baker's oven sent fragrant smoke curling into the sky. Children ran through the dirt paths, their laughter a fleeting melody in the otherwise quiet settlement. Leora helped an elderly man haul sacks of grain from a wagon, her hands quick and sure despite the chill. And Kalen lingered near the shadows of the wooden storefronts, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. He never interfered, never offered assistance unless she clearly needed it. Yet his eyes never left her, a constant presence she felt in the corners of her vision. Red River's people were curious, and rumors began to gather like clouds before a storm. Some whispered about Leora's grace and quiet confidence, suggesting she was more than she appeared. Others, less charitable, murmured about pride and pretension, imagining that any woman who moved through the town so icily could not be without secrets. Among them, a few men cast glances, tinged with desire or challenge, but Leora's gaze never lingered on them. Her focus remained on Kalen, though she knew it was dangerous to acknowledge it openly. A man like him, marked by past rejection and wary of motives, would never forgive deception easily, yet she could not deny the hope that stirred in her chest whenever their eyes met. In the evenings, Leora often found herself on the outskirts of town, walking along the ridges where the wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Kalen would sometimes appear without warning, his movements silent, almost like a shadow in the fading light. They spoke in careful, measured sentences, yet every word carried weight. He asked little about her past, and she revealed nothing. Yet their conversation hinted at truths deeper than either dared to voice. Each exchange left them both unsettled, aware that the connection forming between them was dangerous and exhilarating all at once. Leora's nights were restless, filled with dreams that blurred the line between memory and desire. She remembered the life she had left behind, the grand halls and glittering parties, the endless expectations that had suffocated her. And yet, in her dreams, Kellen's presence intruded not as a phantom, but as a living, breathing possibility. She imagined him walking alongside her through the snow-covered valley, speaking in his low, calm voice, his hand brushing hers in fleeting, tentative gestures. She awoke with a start each time, heart pounding, reminded that reality was far more complicated and far less forgiving than the visions her mind conjured in sleep. Kalen, for his part, wrestled with his own conflicted emotions. He had spent years building walls around his heart, learning that attachment brought only disappointment. Yet Leora, with her quiet strength and subtle elegance, chipped at those walls without even trying. He could not deny the pull toward her, a force that felt like wind against stone, relentless and inevitable. And yet he remained cautious, for he knew too well the cost of misjudging a person. And Red River was a place where appearances often disguised far more than they revealed. Amid this fragile tension, a new element arrived in the town. A stranger dressed in fine leather and carrying a polished rifle entered Red River with the self-assurance of someone accustomed to command. His name was Darius Thorne, a man whose reputation for cunning and ambition preceded him. He watched Leora carefully, noting the subtle way she moved through the town. And Kalen, with even greater scrutiny, recognizing in the Apache a strength and presence that could challenge his designs. Whispers of his arrival spread quickly, and while some saw him as a potential ally, others suspected trouble. Sensing that his motives were far from innocent, Leora's instincts, honed by years of navigating deception, immediately bristled. She sensed in Darius a threat not just to her anonymity, but to the fragile bond growing between her and Kalen. His attention was not casual, and his smile, sharp and deliberate, carried an edge that unsettled even the most confident of townsfolk. She found herself drawn to Kalen more strongly in response, aware that their unspoken connection had become a shield against forces neither fully understood. And Kalen, sensing her unease, remained close, silent sentinel whose vigilance never faltered. Days passed and the subtle patterns of tension grew more pronounced. Leora began helping the local schoolteacher, earning the goodwill of the townspeople, while Kalen quietly ensured her safety from threats, both obvious and unseen. Together, they navigated the delicate balance of trust, secrecy, and growing desire, each step forward complicated by the presence of Darius Thorne, whose motives remained opaque and by the quiet, watchful eyes of neighbors who suspected there was more to Leora than met the eye. One evening, as the sky turned to a deep indigo and the first stars emerged, Leora stood near the river, tossing pebbles into the current as she pondered the path her life had taken. The water carried the reflections of moonlight and shadow, intertwining like the threads of fate that had brought her to this remote valley. Kalen appeared silently beside her, the frost on his shoulders glinting in the silver light. They did not speak at first, letting the sound of the river fill the quiet space between them. Then, in a voice low and deliberate, he said, "The world is changing, and we cannot ignore it. Forces are moving that could undo everything we've built, even in these small, quiet steps." Leora nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She understood that their story was no longer theirs alone. The town, the stranger, the hidden past, saw these forces pressed in, demanding decisions she was not yet ready to make. Her hand brushed against his briefly, a silent affirmation that, despite uncertainty, she would not face the coming trials alone. And Kalen, though he did not say it aloud, understood the truth she conveyed with that fleeting touch. Their fates were intertwined, and whether by fortune or design, they would confront the challenges ahead together. As the night deepened, shadows lengthened across Red River, and the wind whispered warnings through the skeletal trees lining the valley. Leora and Kalen remained by the river, aware that the fragile peace they had carved for themselves could shatter at any moment. The first snow of winter fell softly, a quiet cloak over the town, hiding both the beauty and the dangers that awaited. Somewhere in the distance, Darius Thorne watched, his intentions still hidden behind careful eyes and the townsfolk. Oblivious to the threads of intrigue and desire weaving through their lives, continued their routines, unaware of the storm approaching. And so, Red River slept, but not in peace. Beneath the quiet exterior, tensions simmered, secrets festered, and a love tested by deception and circumstance began to take shape. Leora Vale, the widow who had forsaken riches for the promise of true devotion, and Kalen Redhawk, the man marked by rejection yet unbroken in spirit, stood at the edge of destiny. Each choice they made, each glance and word exchanged, carried weight beyond their understanding. And somewhere beyond the hills, the coming events waited, inevitable as winter, ready to challenge hearts, reveal truths, and test the limits of courage and trust in ways neither could yet imagine. The first frost lingered longer than usual that morning, coating Red River in a thin layer of glistening ice that made each step treacherous. Leora Vale moved carefully along the town's main street, her breath rising in soft clouds, her mind restless with thoughts she could not share with anyone. Darius Thorne had been seen the night before, lingering near the inn, his sharp gaze sweeping the area as if measuring every detail. And she could not shake the feeling that he was planning something beyond mere curiosity. She had no way of knowing his intentions, yet instinct told her to tread carefully. The town seemed quiet, but every glance from a neighbor or passerby carried the possibility of discovery, and she felt the weight of her secret pressing on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Kalen Redhawk appeared suddenly at her side, his presence both comforting and tense. He had risen early to check the traps along the river, and now he walked with a careful attentiveness that betrayed both habit and concern. "He is watching us," Kalen said, his voice low and measured, his dark eyes scanning the street for any sign of Darius. Leora's hand brushed against his as they passed the blacksmith's forge, a fleeting touch that spoke more than words could convey. She wanted to tell him she trusted him completely. Yet the risk of exposure remained, and each step forward required careful balance. Meanwhile, Darius Thorne had made his way to the outskirts of town, speaking in hushed tones with a man named Silas Brenton, a local store owner known for his ambitions and willingness to bend the rules. Silas had always been curious about Leora, and Darius recognized that curiosity is a weakness he could exploit. The two men's conversation carried an undercurrent of planning and intent. Though the townsfolk remained unaware of their plotting, Darius's sharp features betrayed no emotion, yet his mind was alive with schemes, a web he intended to weave around Leora and Kalen. Silas, eager for influence and profit, nodded at each suggestion. Unaware that he was stepping into a situation far beyond his control, Leora, unaware of their meeting, continued her morning errands, helping a widow gather firewood and checking on the small schoolhouse where children struggled to keep warm. She moved with quiet confidence, performing acts of kindness that drew admiration from the townspeople. Yet each smile and word was calculated, a careful mask to protect her true self. Even in these small tasks, she felt the pull of tension, the undercurrent of danger that Darius's presence brought into the town. Her eyes kept drifting toward Kalen, who followed at a distance, ever watchful, his instincts sharp as a hawk. The first real test of their fragile routine came when a shipment of supplies arrived from the neighboring town. Darius had arranged for his men to intercept it. Claiming ownership and asserting rights the local authorities could not immediately contest. Leora witnessed the confrontation from across the street, her pulse quickening as she realized the danger that was creeping closer. Kalen stepped forward, his posture calm yet unyielding, his hand resting on the hilt of the knife at his belt. The townsfolk gathered, some murmuring in confusion, others clearly impressed by Kellen's quiet authority. Leora felt a surge of relief mixed with anxiety, knowing that his presence alone would not solve the problem, but it might buy her the time she needed to maneuver safely. At the inn later that evening, Leora and Kalen discussed the growing tension in hushed tones. The room smelled of wood smoke and the faint temps of iron from the fireplace, a stark contrast to the elegant chambers she had once known. "We cannot let him gain a foothold here," Kalen said, his gaze intense. "He will test the town, test us, and push us to mistakes if we let him." Leora nodded, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "I know," she said softly, "but every move we make must be careful. One slip, and everything we've built could collapse." The quiet intimacy of the room belied the danger lurking beyond the walls, the forces gathering that neither of them fully understood. Outside, Silas Brenton had begun sowing rumors, subtle whispers about Leora's past, her supposed wealth, and her mysterious origins. The townspeople, ever curious and quick to speculate, began questioning her motives, their whispers a thread that could unravel her carefully maintained disguise. Leora felt the sting of suspicion, the uncomfortable awareness that even good deeds could be misinterpreted. She realized that winning hearts in Red River required more than kindness. It required careful navigation of perception, manipulation of expectations, and unwavering composure under scrutiny. Kalen observed these developments silently, his mind working to anticipate every move Darius and Silas might make. He knew that patience and timing were their greatest weapons, but the unpredictable nature of human behavior made the stakes higher with each passing day. He had learned to survive through skill, instinct, and observation. Yet Leora's presence introduced a new variable, a heart that demanded protection not just from external threats, but from the consequences of her own choices and misjudgments. As the week wore on, the tension between the townsfolk and the newcomers grew. A small fire broke out near the general store, narrowly contained by quick action and a mixture of luck and skill. Whispers of sabotage spread and suspicion fell on Leora, though she had played no part. The town's eyes, once merely curious, now lingered with scrutiny, weighing her movements, interpreting her intentions, and measuring her responses. Each encounter became a test, each glance a potential trap. Leora felt the pressure mounting, the need to maintain her disguise while simultaneously protecting Kaelin, whose involvement made her vulnerable in ways she had not anticipated. Kellen's own past threatened to resurface. Members of his former tribe were rumored to be traveling through the region, and though their intentions were unknown, he feared confrontation that could jeopardize the fragile stability he had begun to find in Red River. He carried memories of rejection and survival, lessons learned through hardship and solitude. Yet Leora's presence forced him to reconsider the value of connection, trust, and vulnerability. Their bond, delicate yet undeniable, became both a strength and a source of potential peril. As each choice carried consequences far beyond immediate understanding, one night, as snow fell heavily over Red River, blanketing the town in silence, Leora and Kaelin met near the frozen river, the wind biting at their cheeks. They spoke in whispers, sharing observations, fears, and small plans for navigating the growing tension. "He will not stop," Kaelin said, his eyes dark with worry. "Darius and his allies will continue to push, to provoke, to test the town and us. We must anticipate the moves before they are made." Leora nodded, her thoughts heavy with the burden of secrecy and the risk of exposure. "And we must protect each other," she said softly. "Not just from them, but from mistakes, misunderstandings, and the town's suspicion. Every step is a test." The following days brought a series of challenges that heightened the conflict. Darius's men began small acts of intimidation, straightening traitors, questioning Kellen's authority, spreading rumors about Leora's past. Each act escalated the tension, forcing the town to choose sides without understanding the full story. Leora moved among the townspeople with care, offering aid and guidance while maintaining her disguise, but the strain became apparent. Even small gestures carried weight, and the fear of discovery hung over every interaction like a dark cloud. Through it all, Kaelin remained a steady presence, his instincts sharp, his judgment precise. He intercepted potential threats, guided Leora's steps, and quietly counseled her on navigating the web of suspicion and ambition that had begun to entangle Red River. Yet he knew that patience alone would not suffice. Eventually, the stakes would demand action, courage, and perhaps confrontation. And in the shadow of each decision lay the unspoken question: could their bonds survive the pressures building from within and outside the town? Meanwhile, Darius Thorne's schemes became bolder. He began pressing local authorities to challenge Kellen's influence, questioning his right to act in the town's best interest and subtly suggesting Leora's intentions were less than pure. The subtle manipulations sowed discord, creating tension among neighbors and friends who had once been indifferent or supportive. Leora felt the sting of accusation, the weight of doubt from those she had sought to help, and the pressure to maintain her facade grew heavier with every passing day. As the nights lengthened and the winter deepened, Red River became a town on edge. Every movement, every conversation carried potential risk. Leora and Kaelin were drawn together by necessity and by growing affection, yet each step forward was fraught with danger. The snow muffled sounds, but it could not conceal the watchful eyes of those who sought advantage, nor the relentless determination of a man like Darius Thorne, who would stop at nothing to achieve his aims. And so, beneath the quiet veneer of frontier life, the tension mounted. Leora Vale, the rich widow in disguise, navigated a delicate path of secrecy and kindness, seeking a love that might be threatened by her own past. Kaelin Redhawk, the rejected Apache, stood at her side, a guardian of heart and body, torn between caution and desire. Darius Thorne, the cunning outsider, plotted in the shadows, while the town of Red River, unaware of the true danger swirling among them, went about its daily routines, setting the stage for confrontation, revelation, and decisions that could change the course of every life in the valley. The snow continued to fall, each flake a reminder that time was slipping, that tensions were rising, and that choices made in the shadows of winter would shape the future in ways no one could yet predict. And as Leora and Kaelin stood together near the frozen riverbank, hearts bound by hope and fear, they understood only one truth: the coming days would demand courage, patience, and trust, and nothing in Red River would ever be the same. The snow fell heavier than ever, blanketing Red River in a silence that felt almost unnatural. The townsfolk moved cautiously through the streets, boots crunching on the icy paths, eyes darting nervously at every shadow. Rumors of Darius Thorne's schemes had spread like wildfire, whispers twisting in corners. And the uneasy feeling in the town had become almost tangible. Leora Vale stepped lightly along the edge of the frozen river, her gray shawl pulled tightly against the cold, and her thoughts raced faster than the wind. Every glance over her shoulder reminded her of Darius, lurking somewhere, planning his next move. She knew he would not stop until he had forced a confrontation, and the thought sent a shiver through her that had little to do with winter's chill. Kaelin Redhawk appeared beside her, silent as the snowfall, his dark eyes scanning the surrounding woods and streets. He had spent the day intercepting rumors, calming townsfolk, and quietly redirecting suspicion that had begun to center on Leora. Yet even he felt the weight of impending conflict. The sense that Darius Thorne's ambitions were about to collide violently with their fragile peace. "He will make his move tonight," Kaelin said, his voice low and tense, "and it will be bold. Watch the town. Watch your steps. Do not give him a reason." Leora nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate deep in her chest. The danger was no longer abstract. It was close, tangible, and imminent. Across the town, Darius Thorne had gathered his men in the abandoned barn at the outskirts of the valley, their faces shadowed by lantern light. Silas Brenton, eager to prove his loyalty and ambition, fidgeted beside him, but Darius's gaze was sharp, unyielding. "Tonight," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet, "we claim what we can. The widow is a prize, the town is a tool, and the Apache is a nuisance that must be removed." His tone was cold, calculated, and his men nodded, some with anticipation, others with unease at the audacity of the plan. Darius had carefully studied Kaelin and Leora, learned their habits, and now intended to strike at the heart of the town and the bond that had begun to form between them. Back at the inn, Leora and Kaelin planned cautiously, aware that the first move would determine the course of the conflict. "We must stay ahead," Leora said, her eyes meeting Kellen's, their unspoken connection holding them together in the chill night. "If he strikes, he will test everything we've built. We need allies, strategy, and quick thinking." Kaelin nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We will protect the town, but we protect each other first. No distractions. No mistakes. Tonight will test more than strength. It will test trust and heart." The weight of his words hung heavy, and Leora realized the true depth of what lay ahead as the night deepened. The first signs of Darius's plan began to unfold. Strange noises echoed from the outskirts of town, shadows moving in unnatural patterns through the snow. Leora felt her pulse quicken, the anticipation of confrontation mixing with fear and resolve. She and Kaelin moved quietly, checking the streets, ensuring that the townspeople were safe, and reading each movement for signs of impending danger. Every glance, every sound, carried the possibility of attack, and every heartbeat reminded them that the calm they had cherished was about to break. Then a sudden cry pierced the night. A lantern flared in the distance, illuminating figures moving with purpose. Leora grabbed Kellen's arm, her hand trembling despite the strength of their bond. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the whipping wind. Kaelin nodded, eyes narrowing as he scanned the approach of Darius's men, their intent clear in the harsh lines of their silhouettes. "Stay close," he said. "Trust no one but your instincts and me." Their steps fell in sync as they moved toward the looming confrontation. Each aware that hesitation could prove fatal, the streets became a maze of tension and uncertainty. Shadows leaped across frosted windows, the crunch of boots on snow echoing like a warning. Leora's heart raced with every step, and yet, in the midst of fear, she felt a strange clarity, a recognition that her path, her disguise, and her desire for love had led her to this moment. Kaylin, silent and focused, moved beside her, a steady presence that anchored her amidst the chaos. Together, they were more than the sum of their fears. But the challenge ahead would push them to the limits of courage and ingenuity. Darius's first move came swiftly. A group of his men attempted to block the main street, intending to isolate the inn where Leora had taken shelter. The townsfolk, sensing danger, scattered in fear, while Kaylin and Leora moved with precision, slipping between shadows and using knowledge of the town's layout to avoid direct confrontation. Every moment was fraught with risk, and each decision carried the weight of lives dependent on it. Leora felt the thrill of urgency and the terror of exposure, knowing that one mistake could reveal her true identity or put Kalan in danger. The confrontation escalated when Silas Brenton, emboldened by Darius's presence, tried to corner Leora, his voice raising accusations about wealth, deceit, and motives. Leora met his gaze steadily, refusing to betray her secret, yet her calm only seemed to enrage him further. Kellen's response was immediate, moving with quiet force to shield her without violence if possible, his presence a warning to those who underestimated him. Tension crackled in the cold night air, the weight of secrecy, desire, and imminent danger compressing every moment into a heartbeat of suspense in the shadows. The townspeople watched, some horrified, some mesmerized, and some ready to intervene. Leora realized the fragile balance she had maintained with the town was slipping, the rumors and suspicion colliding with the immediate threat of Darius's attack. She needed to act not just to protect herself, but to preserve the fragile peace she had tried to build and to protect the man, whose heart had chosen her despite rejection and solitude. Every word she spoke, every step she took, was measured, deliberate, and crucial. Kellen's instincts guided them toward a narrow alley that led behind the inn, a path few in Red River knew well. "This way," he whispered, his hand brushing hers in reassurance. The snow fell harder now, masking their tracks, and Leora felt a surge of hope even in the midst of fear. They moved quickly, silently, aware that Darius's men would not hesitate to follow if they sensed an advantage. And yet, in this fleeting moment, the bond between them strengthened, each trusting the other to navigate danger, deception, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. But the climax was not yet upon them. Darius, recognizing that his first attempt had failed, adjusted his strategy, sending another contingent to encircle the inn and cut off escape. The tension in the town reached a peak. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as if aware of the approaching confrontation. Leora's heart pounded not from fear alone, but from the anticipation of moments that would test courage, loyalty, and love in ways she had never imagined. Kellen's dark eyes never wavered, his stance ready to respond, his mind calculating every possibility, knowing that the next minutes could determine the future of Red River, of their connection, and of Leora's carefully guarded secret. As the night deepened, and the snow continued to fall like a silent witness, the stage was set. Every alley, every shadow, every frozen window framed the tension, the anticipation, the unspoken question: would courage and trust overcome ambition and deceit? Or would the fragile bond between the widow and the rejected Apache shatter under pressure? The town slept uneasily, unaware of the approaching storm. And yet in the hearts of those most involved, Leora Vale and Kaylin Redhawk, the moment of reckoning drew closer with every step. Every whispered word and every glance that spoke volumes without speaking at all, even as the threat loomed. Leora felt the faint stirrings of hope. She and Kaylin had survived suspicion, rumor, and danger before, and their connection had deepened under pressure. Yet the night held uncertainty, and the power of Darius Thorne and his allies remained a shadow over every decision. The snow muffled footsteps but could not hide intent. And the tension between love, secrecy, and danger had never been higher. The next moments would demand everything they possessed: courage, cleverness, and the trust that had grown quietly between them despite the odds. And so, Red River waited under the blanket of snow in silence. The climax approaching but not yet realized. The hearts of the widow in disguise and the rejected Apache intertwined yet tested, the schemes of Darius Thorne tightening like a noose, and the townsfolk unaware that their lives were about to intersect with forces far greater than they could imagine. Every shadow, every echo, every breath carried the weight of what was coming. The snow fell, and the night stretched on, thick with suspense, danger, and the fragile promise of love that refused to be extinguished despite the looming storm. The first rays of dawn broke over Red River, turning the snow-covered valley into a glimmering sea of silver. The tension that had gripped the town for weeks seemed to hang in the air one last time, a fragile thread before release. Leora Vales stepped cautiously from the inn, her breath misting in the crisp morning air, and for the first time in days, she felt a sense of calm begin to seep into her bones. She had survived the night, survived the danger, and now, with Kalen Redhawk by her side, the uncertainty that had loomed over her heart began to lift. Kalen appeared beside her silently, his presence steady and reassuring. The night's events had tested him as much as anyone, but he had remained steadfast, protecting Leora without compromise, reading the town and its shadows with unmatched clarity. "It's quiet," he said, his voice low, though a hint of relief softened its usual intensity. "Too quiet," Leora smiled faintly, letting her guard drop just enough to allow herself a moment of hope. "Quiet can be good," she said. "After all, even storms pass." The words were simple, but the weight behind them carried the lessons of survival, trust, and love they had learned together. The confrontation with Darius Thorne had not been easy. When his men had tried to seize control of the town, Kalen had acted with precision, guiding townsfolk to safety while confronting the intruders strategically. His reputation, built on skill and honor, had swayed many who had once been uncertain of his presence in Red River, and Leora, even under the threat of exposure, had shown courage and intelligence. Using her understanding of the townspeople and the layout of Red River to stay one step ahead of Darius's schemes, their combined efforts had turned potential disaster into an advantage. Exposing Darius and Silas Brinton for their deception and ambition, by the time Darius was finally confronted, his threats had lost their edge. He stood before the town's small council, forced to answer for his attempts at manipulation and intimidation. His carefully constructed schemes unraveling in the light of truth. Silas Brinton, once eager and ambitious, now looked small and defeated. Understanding for the first time that loyalty built on fear and personal gain could not withstand honesty and courage. The townsfolk, once uncertain of Leora and Kalen, now saw them as protectors, leaders, and examples of integrity. Respect, once fragile and hesitant, became a quiet celebration of their bravery. With the threat removed, Red River began to return to its natural rhythm. Snowflakes melted in the warming sun, the streets buzzed softly with life, and the townspeople, freed from the shadow of fear, went about their days with a renewed sense of community. Leora, moving among them, no longer needed to hide behind a disguise of modesty. Her secret, once a potential vulnerability, had been revealed on her own terms, and the response of the people had been nothing short of acceptance. They had come to respect her for her heart, her courage, and her integrity, not for the wealth she had once possessed. Kalen, ever vigilant, allowed himself a rare moment of ease. He walked beside Leora through the streets, their hands brushing, eyes meeting, hearts aligned in quiet understanding. The trials of the past weeks had forged a bond stronger than fear, deception, or distance. In each other, they found not only love, but a partnership built on trust, courage, and mutual respect. The town's approval was comforting, but their connection mattered far more. A private acknowledgement of shared struggle and triumph. Leora's presence, once a secret, became a bridge between past and present. She began helping organize provisions for the town during the winter, teaching skills that had once been part of her life among wealthier circles. And yet she adapted them to the practical needs of Red River. The children learned to read and write under her guidance. The elderly received care and attention. and the town slowly recognized that her wealth, once hidden, was irrelevant compared to the generosity and wisdom she offered freely. Her identity no longer needed concealment. She had earned her place through action, not appearance. Kalen, too, found his own place within the town had shifted. Once an outsider, marked by rejection and solitude, he was now a figure of respect, someone the townsfolk looked to in times of need. He had proven himself through courage, skill, and judgment, and more importantly, through the unwavering loyalty he had shown to Leora. The man who had once been rejected and isolated now walked among friends and neighbors, his past acknowledged, but no longer a burden, and his future filled with possibilities he had scarcely imagined. Even Darius Thorne, now removed from his schemes, left a subtle reminder that challenges could arise again. Though they no longer held power over Red River, the town had learned to value truth, courage, and integrity. And the lessons of the confrontation lingered like a quiet echo. Deception may hide in shadows, but honesty and heart always carry weight in the light. Leora and Kalen, standing together on the riverbank, reflected this lesson in every glance, every gesture, and every unspoken word. The turning point came one afternoon as Leora and Kalen stood near the frozen river. Watching the sun glint off the ice and water, the air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and thawing snow, and a sense of calm pervaded the valley. "We've come far," Leora said quietly, her eyes meeting Kellen's. "Further than I ever imagined. And yet it feels like everything is just beginning." Kellen's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "It is," he said, a rare softness in his voice. "And this time, we face it together. Nothing hidden. No walls. Just us," their connection forged through trials. Deception and danger now felt unbreakable. A quiet triumph over adversity and fear. In the weeks that followed, Red River blossomed under the calm restored by their efforts. Leora's guidance and kindness brought subtle improvements to daily life. Kellen's vigilance and integrity kept the peace. And the townsfolk, once hesitant, now looked to them as pillars of the community. Love, once uncertain and fragile, grew steadily in the quiet moments, shared laughter, gentle touches, and the reassurance of being seen for who they truly were. The snow melted, leaving fertile ground not only for crops, but for dreams, trust, and enduring relationships. The town itself became a reflection of what Leora and Kalen had achieved together. Spaces once divided by rumor and suspicion now carried a sense of unity. Neighbors helped one another without hesitation, and children played freely without fear of hidden threats. The lessons of courage, honesty, and the power of heart over circumstance became woven into the fabric of daily life, leaving an imprint that would last long beyond the winter. Red River was no longer just a town on the edge of the frontier. It was a place where trust and love had triumphed over deception and ambition. And Leora, once a widow who had hidden her wealth and her heart, now moved freely among friends, neighbors, and loved ones. Her disguise, once necessary for protection, had been shed, replaced with a confidence born not of riches, but of resilience and character. She had found the love she had sought, a man who saw her for herself, not for what she possessed, and who had risked everything to stand by her side. Kalen, the rejected Apache, had found his place not only in her heart, but in the town he had once observed from the edges, alone and wary. Together they embodied the triumph of trust, courage, and enduring love. The final evening of winter brought a quiet celebration. The townsfolk gathered around the central square, lanterns casting a warm glow on snow-laden streets. Children laughed and played, neighbors shared stories and food, and Leora and Kalen, standing side by side, allowed themselves a moment to simply breathe and enjoy the calm. No words were necessary. The respect, gratitude, and love surrounding them spoke volumes. The hardships, the secrets, and the dangers had passed, leaving behind a stronger, more connected community, and a love that had been tested by fire and proved unbreakable. As night fell, Leora and Kalen walked along the river hand in hand, listening to the gentle rush of water and the whisper of the wind through the pines. "We made it," Leora said softly. "All of it. Together." Kellen's smile, rare and genuine, reflected the deep satisfaction of a journey completed. Trials overcome, and a heart finally at rest. "Yes," he replied, "and this is only the beginning. For the town, for us, for everything we've built and will build." The snow glistened like diamonds around them. The river mirrored the moonlight. And for the first time, there was no fear, no threat, only a quiet, enduring peace. Red River slept under a blanket of stars that night. The town safe, the people united, and the widow and the Apache no longer separated by secrets, suspicion, or fear. Leora Vale and Kalen Redhawk had found each other not by chance but through courage, patience, and unwavering heart. And as the wind whispered through the valley, carrying the lessons of winter and the promise of spring, the story of love, trust, and triumph over adversity became a quiet legend in Red River. A tale to be told for generations. In the end, what mattered was not wealth, power, or appearance. What mattered was heart, courage, and the willingness to see beyond fear and rejection. Leora and Kalen had discovered that truth, and in doing so, they had not only saved themselves, but also transformed an entire town. Together, they walked forward into a life defined by honesty, love, and shared hope, a life built on the lessons of the past and the promise of everything still to come.